everybody, I'm Chris Farnum. We have a mission to get you to lunch in about half an hour. Does that sound okay, everybody? Yeah? All right. So I am a user experience designer, a senior user experience designer at ProQuest. And today our topic is UXD versus analytics. And this is where I am going to be asking a very important question. Farris, what have you got for me?
Well, I'm Farris Khan. I'm an analytics lead at ProQuest. And this crowd might be a little bit different than what I'm used to. I'm used to people who like a whole bunch of numbers and like to crunch them and things like that. So I would say no. I think the real question is, what have you got for me? We're going to talk about where our specialties overlap, how we are different, and why should we collaborate. Given the timing here, if you have a question or a comment, I think it would probably be best if you use Twitter. Keep in mind that it's WIAD, what is it, A2, right? Yep. A2. So we might be a little bit off there. But if you look at the top, you'll see our Twitter handle. So please communicate with us that way. That would be great.
Yeah, and measure is the hashtag for analytics so that Farris's friends can see this too.
Exactly. Okay, I didn't mention that. Go ahead. So a little background on ProQuest. So I think we do have a mission. Peter Morville was kind of talking about having a mission and also, quote unquote, making money. Our mission is to provide quality information in a academic setting, primarily academic setting. Our customers are librarians. We have 600 people in Ann Arbor. The products that we sell, subscription databases of articles, journals, newspapers, dissertations, etc. And recently we had a massive migration from a legacy platform to a new platform. So we had this big, huge project that we just finished. We had balloons falling like it was New Year's Eve and that sort of thing. Bottom line is our bootstrap days are done. We are now extending and refining our product.
So you're probably familiar with this, but the UXD role, and especially as it relates to ProQuest, we translate business requirements into user experiences using a lot of the deliverables that have already been discussed today. At ProQuest, we work in an agile methodology, meaning that we work in a series of sprints leading up to a release, which is about quarterly. Our sprints are about 2 weeks apiece. We have about 12 team members in the ProQuest user experience team, and we're distributed between Cambridge, UK, and Ann Arbor. We collaborate a lot with other teams in small groups on these sprints. So we have engineers representing these groups, QA folks, product management, and so on, as well as UXD. So I'm going to make a couple of dangerous statements, some perhaps cliches about user experience design in general. And the first one is that we tend to be fairly qualitative, on the qualitative side. Most of us very much steeped in the idea that you're going to do guerrilla usability testing, like Jacob Nielsen or Steve Krug, that the idea is to talk to a few users who are going to give you feedback on your design so that you can iterate. Now, we also really like to do more longitudinal studies and deeper user research involving more numbers, but we often find that time and budget don't necessarily support this. So we get to know the personas that we study as well as we can by talking to representative users so that we can go really deep and narrow on the audiences that we're trying to design for. And I won't go over the deliverables again, which have been well covered today, but as much as we like to rely on user studies, we also often rely on heuristics and the instincts that we get from talking and thinking about users and getting into their headspace. So the UXD team at ProQuest had an interesting development in the last year, and that's that organizational changes placed us into the same organizational grouping with an analytics lead, which in some ways is awesome, but when you bring two specialties together, sometimes you start to have some questions like, who is this guy? And he's publishing this report about the platform I helped design. So what's he saying? And is he saying the right stuff? And do our territories overlap? Are we actually maybe even competitors in order to get, to have a say about the strategic direction of the platform? He's got all these numbers, this qualitative stuff. I'm kind of a master at quantitative information and really knowing my users, but in the boardroom, who's going to listen more? Who's going to get more attention? Is it the person with the numbers or the person with the tribal knowledge? So, Farris, as the new guy, tell me about yourself. What is this digital analytics stuff, and what ground do you have to stand on?
So this might not play in this audience, but I have some numbers, and I'm here to help. Does that make you less nervous? I don't know. It probably makes you more nervous. I'm not sure. But what we do, this is the context of ProQuest. What we do is we're trying to figure out all these different data sources, and we're trying to make sense of it. The x-axis is maturity, the y-axis is actionability, and it's intended that this is kind of an exponential curve. First phase is really to measure. So we just want to have credibility in the data. We just want people who are reviewing the data to feel like it's real. We're measuring the right thing. We move on to the intelligence phase where we actually have a trend line. We've already achieved measure. We've already achieved intelligence. Intelligence is really the idea that you know what's normal and you know what is kind of weird. Something weird is happening here. Third phase, which I think we're in today, is decision support. So we have data that helps us make decisions. And maybe this is where it might make some UXD people a little bit nervous. Finally is a smart system. And this is where you got all kinds of data, and maybe humans don't even need to be involved. We use the data, and using the numbers themselves will modify the website or the platform or whatever we're dealing with.
I'm starting to twitch a little bit, Chris. This is making me a little nervous.
All right, we're not there yet, but that's maybe a dream. Okay. At least for a numbers person, that's a dream. Right? Okay, so we had talked about, or Peter talked about ecosystems and having an ecosystem and how that's important. This is our ecosystem as it applies to analytics. There's usage. Usage is what we've historically had. That's really the consumption of documents. The metric is what? What are those documents that are being consumed? Then we have behavioral and observational data, and this is the object of analysis isn't a thing. It's not a document. It's actually the visitor. And we're trying to figure out where they are coming from and when they're on the site and their path through the site, that sort of thing. The third element, and I think this is where it overlaps with UXD, is the object of analysis being the visitor, but the metrics are, who are these people? Why are they coming to the site? What is their satisfaction? That sort of thing. Now, people talk about seamlessly integrated holy grails of connecting all of this data, but the reality is it's hard to do that. It's impossible to do that, really. So what we do is we roll everything up into a unit of analysis, either a day or a week or a month. So different systems, I don't worry about the fact that I can't connect them directly. I connect them indirectly by using this unit of analysis. So let me go into a little bit of detail on that. The flagship report that I produce on a monthly and sometimes weekly basis is this heat map report. I prefer this over what some people refer to as dashboards. There's 300 pieces of data on this page. Each of the columns represents a KPI. So, for example, the second column you see is page views per visit. Other KPIs might be satisfaction, task completion, percentage of visits in the US versus international, et cetera. Each of the rows that you see are time units. In this case, we're looking at weeks. Doesn't even matter that whether you can see these numbers or not. Somebody who's really into numbers will zoom in and take a look at the numbers. But what's key here is that I've applied conditional formatting to each of these columns. Dark blue represents most favorable. Light blue represents least favorable. I'm going to just point to the second column there, and you see it's very dark blue, turns into very light blue. I'll go into details about that a little bit later. The other thing that I do is I take all these disparate systems, and this one is from one of our vendors, and I won't name them, but it starts with a 4, it ends with a, oh no, maybe I shouldn't. So anyway, there's all kinds of data here. To me, it looks like uncooked spaghetti. There's a whole bunch of trend lines, and they do great work. It's just in this case, there's not much context here to try to figure out what these red line and blue lines and all these lines mean, and if things are really changing. So what I do is I take that data and I add additional analysis to it. So I try to figure out the standard deviation. I try to create confidence intervals. And in this case, I looked at only one of those lines, kind of zoomed in. In this case, we're looking at just satisfaction. And you can see how that data is going up and down. Now, I don't know for sure, because these are surveys we're dealing with, satisfaction surveys, if a particular dot a particular dot compares to another dot. But if I show that path, that confidence interval path, you have a really good understanding of it's most likely somewhere within that little road that I've created by that green and red line. So the approach in general for digital analytics, not specific to ProQuest, but in general, is it's a quantitative one. It's focused on what did most users do. We're reporting trends, and you saw how I kind of modify that to make it statistically significant, so to speak. Our view, though, is broad and shallow. We can't talk to a visitor for 20 minutes. We might be able to ask them a survey question or two. That's about it. The deliverables and tools we use, we have our internal data warehouse. We have behavioral analytics, in our case, web trends, attitudinal analytics, 4C, system response testing, Gomez, and then we roll it up into these weekly and monthly reports.
So as I mentioned, Farris and I wound up in the same group, and we were actually in back-to-back queues in our office. And interesting conversations tend to break out about the numbers and about things that he's seen. And we had a couple of other participants in these conversations here, like Doran in the back, who also sits right next to us. And so these conversations break out, and I want to take you through a few of them so that you can kind of see how communication sort of evolved between me and Farris over a course of several months. So here's one of our early ones.
Okay, I got to pretend like I'm on typing on my...
Doing our thing, typing along, making reports.
Right, so I'm looking at the data, and I'm relatively new to this department. And I'm looking at the data, and I'm saying, why do some segments have different satisfaction than others? And it's statistically significant. I'm seeing, I narrowed down to just students, so these aren't librarians, these aren't professors. I'm only looking at students looking at our platform. And I see, as people go from elementary school to high school to community college, the satisfaction keeps going up. Undergrad first and second year basically matches community college, and then the satisfaction starts going down. Conditional formatting here, dark blue, most favorable, light blue, least favorable. So it's interesting insight from my perspective because I'm blind to exactly why that might be.
So, Farris, you're pointing out something interesting, and I think it's interesting maybe for a different reason than you do. This is something that actually makes me pretty happy because when we were designing personas a couple years ago for the new platform, we really had to make some decisions about how to design things. And we use personas as that tool. So we defined a bunch of personas. So this is an academic search platform, and we know that librarians, who are our customers and make the purchase decision, are also users. But there are also lots of students out there, and they range from grad students to high schoolers. But we had to choose who to put in the center of our bullseye diagram for our personas, and that was the undergraduate intermediate researcher. So looking back at Farris's chart for a moment, that's exactly who had the highest satisfaction scores, and then it kind of tapers down when you get to more expert searchers and down when you go toward more novice searchers. So in a way, I would say that the numbers are bearing out the decisions that we made. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want to pay attention to the satisfaction of librarians and more novice users. We also need to support them, too, and that's something we can do over the long term. But so far, the pattern is one that actually confirms the approach that we took. So in this conversation, digital analytics was really good at finding a pattern in the data. And UXD was able to jump in and offer some context and help bring Farris up to speed a little bit and share with him this persona diagram so that he could get a deeper understanding of our personas, too, and the audience segments that he's tracking.
So let's go back to the cubes here. So it's typing out right, yeah, so.
So a few weeks or maybe a month later, I'm doing my morning email, and one of those long threads shows up in my email, and boy, there's this customer service request out there asking that we need to improve how people narrow results. We need to have better ways to narrow results. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, we have a lot of great ways to narrow results. On the results page, as a team, we came up with all of these great facets for narrowing results that we put on the right side of the page. We also offer some suggested searches, and back on the advanced search page, wow, there's just tons of tools that we have so that people can limit their searches and come up with a more narrow result. So, boy, what's the problem here? Is it that we need to make these methods easier or more accessible? Or, wait a minute, these customer service requests, I kind of think about them, with a grain of salt, because what if it's just one squeaky wheel, one loud customer who puts in this request, and then we all have to dance about it? So, Farris, help me out here. What have you got for me?
All right, so let's go to the next slide. So here's what we can do. We can figure out the squeaky wheel, as you call it. Is it a random squeaky wheel comment, and all of a sudden we make a change for this one person, and there are 5 other people that liked it the way it was, and now we have to kind of go back and forth, and we keep changing our interface? Or is this a representative comment? And the way to kind of get at that is you use quantitative data to segue into qualitative research. And what I would do, where I would start with that, is satisfaction summary. This is, again, 4C. Data that you're looking at here, and we can just highlight one of these elements. Let me just kind of give you some navigation of what this is. Left side, this is a predictive model. The left side are the elements that have an influence on satisfaction. Each of those elements have multiple questions. The middle is satisfaction itself. The right side is future behaviors, things like likelihood to use as a primary resource, likelihood to recommend, likelihood to return, that sort of thing. So satisfaction can be used as a lever to improve things that you want to improve on the site. I'm looking specifically at navigation, and I'm looking at not just the score, but there's another number next to it, which is impact. The higher, the better. So there is a relatively high impact of navigation on customer satisfaction. So I'm thinking, okay, at least quantitatively, that narrowing search options might have something to do with that. I also see search itself has a relatively high impact. But what I could do then is deconstruct all of the questions. So this is sort of taking a step beyond what 4C would provide. And what we're looking at here is basically all of the sort of positive responses, relatively high score, relatively low impact on satisfaction. And what we're looking here is accuracy of information, quality of information, ability to read graphics, that sort of thing. In the middle, you see things like how well the site is organized, visual appeal. But then we have another area of focus, and these are the questions of all the questions we ask in the predictive model that seem to resonate in terms of having things that we need to focus on. And 2 in particular are actually very low scoring and relatively high impact. The first one is how well search options help narrow results, so there's that word narrow, and then reducing the number of clicks to get to where I want to go. So I think both of those are related. So I would say the hypothesis that this is a representative comment is probably accurate. Now, what I could do next is make it even more granular and look at the individual survey results, response to the question, what's the one thing we could do to improve the site, and then look at some specific responses to that. So I'm just digging up a few, narrow down the searches to more specifics, provide tips for narrowing search, provide more user-friendly narrowing devices, and be able to narrow search results to find articles with full text. What's cool about this is that we have thousands of survey responses. We're getting down to just the one page that has to do with this specific issue.
Yeah, it was actually very interesting to me that Farris could take all of those surveys and then use different user characteristics and even keywords to narrow down to ones that really pertain to the question I had to ask him. So in this conversation, UNC needed some background before diving in and starting to design all kinds of other solutions and find out a little bit more about the context. And Digital Analytics was able to offer this quantitative to qualitative data in order to help me get there and understand the issue a little bit better. So let's move to conversation.
All right, so we're back at our cubes here, and I'm asking, I'm tired and hungry, kind of like I am right now. And I'm preparing my monthly report, and actually I noticed something new. And I actually double-checked the numbers. That's why I'm tired, because the numbers were so dramatically different. The page views per visit drop, but the other statistics remain constant. What does this mean? Go ahead, you can go to the next page so I can kind of show you that. If you look at that second column, you're going dark blue to light blue, page views per visit. But if you look at, for example, median visit duration, actually, if you want to look at the specific numbers for page view per visit, we were around 9. We dropped to about 5. This is right at when we did a release. But if you look at median visit duration, for example, it's hovering around a 6 minutes is basically what that is. And if you look at satisfaction, it's neither really going up or down. It's just about the same before and after. So I'm really confused by this.
And this conversation started breaking up in my cube row too, and I think I pulled out my headphones, I started to listen to it a little bit, and then I listened a little bit more, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting, that there's this one thing, the number of pages that changed, but the other stats stayed the same. And in my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, the number of page views per visit. That's sometimes, if you're on a particular kind of site, more page views per visit is a really good thing. In other task-based types of sites, maybe if it's going down, it's a sign that your users are finding what they want, and they maybe are spending less time clicking around and more time reading your content, and then using it, moving on. So I also started thinking about what changed recently. And I went back and thought about recent releases, and I realized I had a new hypothesis here that I shared with Farris, that, Farris, we had this page that you would have to go to if you wanted to cross-search certain databases with each other, if you wanted to pick multiple databases. And the only place you could do this is if you navigated to this one specific page. But then in a recent release, what we did was we made it a dynamic hover layer so that people could drop down from the top and perform that same activity without leaving the page. So if we're looking for reasons why maybe the page loads went down, but time on site and other stats stayed the same, here's a case that maybe fits into how we're measuring things. Maybe we're measuring full page loads instead of looking at, for example, how many times people brought up this panel. So this is a case where digital analytics was able to really efficiently spot sort of an aberration in the trend line, where he had a nice baseline going, and then he saw a dramatic shift, and it coincided with one of the releases. So UXD was able to come up with at least a few hypotheses why this might happen, and it resulted in some further investigation too.
So let me talk about differences, and we have a little bit of a wall in between us. The digital analytics is quantitative. It's about what most users do, the reporting trends. It's a broad and shallow view, as I mentioned earlier. And there's this buzzword called big data analysis. To me, it just means that I have a whole bunch of sources for data, and then I have to figure out how to make sense of it. On the user experience side, it's qualitative. It's why did you do that? It deals with design decisions. It's deep and narrow, so it's a very specific area, but it goes deep. And it involves humans. It involves live user research. Although there are differences, there's commonalities, and hopefully you can see this in our presentation. There's deep interest in user behavior. We both want to increase user satisfaction. We both have a desire to influence strategic decisions. And I think there is a bit of a symbiotic relationship. I'm really hoping that 1 + 1 = 3 as we kind of interact with each other. It's certainly the case in these 3 examples that I provided, or we provided.
And I have to say that maybe I presented it a little bit extremely today, but I actually think that when we get our chocolate and our peanut butter together, the sum is greater than the parts separately.
You have to bring up a food analogy.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know, always hungry. And it's lunchtime. So one of the things that sticks in my mind is talks over the last few years by folks like Lou Rosenfeld, who talk about how specialties within an organization wind up creating a silo of data, and then it's hard to share it with each other. And I think one of the important jobs that we have as information architects and user experience designers is to break down those silos however we can and find ways to collaborate with each other and not actually be frenemies in competition with each other. So some of the ways we've done that over the last year at ProQuest is that we got Farris to come and present his reports at UXD meetings so that we could better understand the reports that he's creating. We also, he came up with a great idea, which was to provide some training in these tools, these analytics tools, and give us logins and passwords and a little bit of help knowing how to use them so that we can do a little of the fishing ourselves, but also always kind of rely on him as an expert to help us interpret and make sure we're getting it right. We've begun to collaborate on some projects so that when a new assignment comes along for us to investigate where we're about to embark on a new project, one of the things that the team's starting to do is to go and either look at the data themselves or ask Farris for background. What are the trends saying about the area that we're about to start designing? What are the comments saying? And let's try to narrow down to specific audiences and see how they're using the information on the site. On the return side, we've also been able to give some input into the survey questions themselves and to help Farris maybe refine his KPIs and look at new things that that should be measured. So one other area I want to point out in terms of the you versus me thing is that I think there's a danger that UXD people might perceive these kinds of analytics techniques as threatening our ability to go off and do user research. Now, yes, that's something you might need to worry about, especially as perceptions go a couple organizational layers higher. However, I think there's a great case to be made that it is better together. That if we are able to look at trends, we're able to look at comments that come in and narrow them down, we can ask better questions when we do user research. We can make sure that we know our audience better from this quantitative perspective so that we know the questions to ask when we get to the qualitative, and the qualitative will be much more meaningful. So I know that we are all hungry, and this is probably a good stopping point for us.
Yeah, just a couple points. Well, first of all, it's kind of interesting that the physical architecture had such an influence on how we work together because we happen to have well, organizationally we got brought together, but we also happen to have cubes. And when I'm thinking aloud, all of a sudden another group has some ideas about what those thoughts are. You have some hypotheses, et cetera. So I just wanted to sort of point that out. Our slide share.
Another unfair advantage that Farris and I had worked together in previous organizations, so kind of knew each other coming in. So maybe we added a little bit today.
Right. Slide share is here. Please communicate with us in terms of questions and comments using our Twitter handles. That would be great. I know it's 12:52, so we're well beyond. We sort of compounded the issue here in terms of getting you guys to lunch. So.
Do we want to have questions, or do we want to wrap it here? Let's wrap it up here, and feel free to communicate with us in the break time or on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.